Hi, this is Henning from FlippedNormals.com. In this tutorial we're going to take a look at how we can light a portrait similar to the one we're looking at right now using MODO. The techniques we're going through here are universal though, so if you're using V-Ray, Mental Ray or any other render engines, this is going to be useful for you. Just analyze this image really quickly. First off, there is one area light coming from the screen left. This is the main key light. Second, we have a rim light coming from screen right. Then we have a fill light coming from bottom screen right, which really kills the blacks in the image. We're also using some depth of field in it to really make it slightly more visually appealing. And it's fairly straightforward. Let's get started. Here we are in MODO, and let's go to the item list. I begin by having a low-res version and a high-res version of the head. This is sculpted in a ZBrush, and you can very quickly make a low-res version of your sculpt using something like Decimation Master. If you're unsure how to use Decimation Master, read the documentation. It's an amazing plugin for ZBrush. So here we have a low-res version and a high-res version of it. The reason we use both is because it's way lighter on the system to render out the low-res version. So for lighting, I tend to stick with the low-res version. Then I periodically switch to the high-res one to see what I'm actually doing. So the first thing we do is we select both of these guys. It's important to select both of them. And then we hit M for material. We create a material and we call it something like head. I've already done it here. This is not a material tutorial, so I'm going to focus on lighting here, as you can spend ages just materials. But in short, it's a fairly simple material we have here. It has slightly warm color to it. It's using blur reflections with match specular on. It has roughness of 50, meaning the reflections are going to be pretty blurry, as opposed to a lower number, which will make them sharper. And that's pretty much it. I'm using 80 or Fresnel and a very low specularity number. And right now there are no lights in the scene at all. I also turned off my environment, so the environment is not contributing at all here. By default, I believe it's set to something like this. So it's set to 1, I believe. So it's going to look something like this if you bring it in. I disable this as I don't want my environment to influence my lighting whatsoever, as it removes my control from it. It's also important to keep your naming clean. Keep your scenes clean, use colors, use correct names, as your lighting scenes will get cluttered as you go. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a backdrop to this. You can also go into your camera. Do you run the camera? And here you can see what's going on. You just pick a camera angle you want and go from there. Next, we make a backdrop. Hit F2 to bring up your modeling tools. Shift click the cube. Scale it up. Use Shift and Space to toggle between item mode and polygon mode. Hit spacebar to switch between the various components. And then invert the selection. I have a hotkey for this. You can find this on our website under how to optimize MODO for faster modeling if you're unsure about any of this. Hit F to flip the normals. Move it down a little bit. Scale it up. And you can add a nice little bevel to this. Select the edge and just hit B for bevel. You can also just add a little roundness to it. So now we have a nice little backdrop. Give it a material, select it, just call it backdrop. And now it's time to light our scene. The way I light my scene is pretty much using only area lights. The reason I use area lights is because they're nice and comfortable. They're great for portraits, and they look comfortable. So just start getting area light in here, and start to position it. We want area light to go from screen left. The reason this is because then we get a nice little shadow, as you can see here. By leaving it in the middle, like this, the lighting is completely flat. If that's what you want, that's perfectly okay. But most of the times, if you make the lighting completely flat, it's gonna look boring. Let me also hide the high-res version, as we don't need that. So let's move it over here. So you can just quickly see in the video here that it becomes more visually interesting by doing something like this. Having half the head is a little dramatic, but we'll stick with it. As you can see here on this image, it comes from about 3/4 view. So it will be something like this. I'm just going to move this over to my second monitor. There we go. And you can also go under shading, final color output, set the saturation to 0. What this will do is it will allow you to only see the values in it. You're not going to be distracted by the colors whatsoever. Also to note here, I've already applied a camera depth of field to my camera, which is under camera group. You can control the depth of field under camera effects. Hit enable, and by default it's disabled. So hit enable, and then you can hit Ctrl F over where you want the focus to be. And this is very handy. You control the amount of blur using the f-stop value. A higher number will make it sharper, a lower number will make it blurrier. So as an example, if I set this to something like 0.01, it's going to be, that's all I'm saying, it's going to be very blurry. So it's about finding the right balance here. Some blur is appealing, but too much is going to kill the image. So you can see very, very blurry. This of course depends, this is scale dependent. So if you're working incorrect scale, you're going to have a hard time with numbers. So you can see what it's doing here. Set this to 0.2. That's still a little too much. 0.3 I think is fine. And again, Ctrl F to focus in the preview. Just hitting here. By hitting here, you can see what the various how the focus distance changes. Next up, we need to tweak this light in intensity. It's slightly too strong now. The way we tweak it under the properties, item list properties, and area light, and just set the radiance down to something like 2. We also want to make sure our lights are grouped. So hit Ctrl G and call it light group. We also always want to name our lights. So I call this key light. The key light is the strongest light in the scene, or the most dominant light in the scene, rather. Next, duplicate the light, hit Ctrl D, and rotate it around. This I want to be my rim light. The rim light is going to be fairly strong as well, but nowhere near as strong as the key light. Well, nowhere near as dominant, at least. The strength might actually be stronger in some occasions, but you want it to be less dominant. The reason we use an area light or rim light is to separate the background or the character from the background. Next, we want a subtle fill light. Before we do that, we need to rename it to rim light. And you're gonna really thank yourself for naming your lights, as this is gonna become handy later on. Also, to note, I'm also rendering using global illumination here, which you can find under shading, render, global illumination, and this is enable. It is enabled by default in MODO. Rename the rim light to fill light. And set the intensity down really low, something like 0.1 is probably fine. This is going to be more apparent once we actually start adding color to our lights. So the reason we do this in black and white first is so we can really make our values work. It's really, really hard to get lost in color. So by doing this, we can make sure our picture is working without color. Let's just switch to our high-res version. Just give it a little time. And there we go. I want to build slightly stronger as well. Slightly higher. Maybe actually back to intensity was before. I also want to make it more dramatic here. Right now it's fairly flat on this side here. So what I need to do is I need to move it slightly more upwards, like this. Now you can see we get more depth in it right away because we're getting shadows. I think I actually want to be slightly stronger as well. Another move a little further away. Actually slightly stronger again. Let's try 7. I can also just drag here. The value is something like 4 and 5.5 seems to be good. Alright, let's say this is working here. Then we need to add color to it. Go back to your final color output. Set your saturation to back to 100. Now you can see some subtle color. There still isn't a lot of color in it, as it's the shader is very, very desaturated. Hit Ctrl S to save your project. And there we go. Next we need to add some color to this. Go under your shader tree and under lights. Here you can see your various lights, and this is where you control the color of it. This is where it's handy to have written your lights named. You can now immediately see which one is key, fill, and rim. So the key light we want to keep kind of cool. As a general rule, you want your key light and rim light to be complementary, meaning you want them to be the opposite color. Some basic color theory for you here. Click the color and make it slightly bluish. So I'll make this side, the key light, slightly blue, and the rim light slightly orange, and the fill light something in between. So make it slightly blue. We don't want it to be too dominant. We want it to still be very desaturated. Next, go to rim light and make this fairly saturated orange. And suddenly the image just pops. It looks way nicer immediately, simply because we added like a complementary colors to it. We're still not done though. Second, we need to go to the fill light and just add some subtle colors to this too. In this one, I'm gonna put in some purple or pink, and this just gives it slightly more life again. And this is pretty much it for the lighting phase. One more general tip here before I render it out is that under my head material, I've added an alpha. I just took my alpha output, duplicated it, and just put it under here. The advantage of doing this is so I can go under, first I should rename this to head alpha. I can go under here and see the head alpha. It's being masked out by the material. So I can now take it into Photoshop and just mask it out from the background. This is very handy. We can also make the background darker, as we haven't really tweaked that. It's still fairly white now. Just hold on the Shift key and drag, and you can make it darker. Turn off specularity, as I don't want any specularity on it. And give it some color as well. You generally want your images to have color in them to some level. I also want to zoom in a little, make the carrot a little bigger. Remove some dead space around here. Also the render outputs I'm using are final color, which is just a beauty pass, ambient occlusion, which looks like this. This is just so I can take some, get some more details out of Photoshop later on. Reflection shading, which looks like this. This is simply just a reflection on top. And specularity, which looks like this. I combine all these in Photoshop afterwards to just really make the image pop. So I'm gonna render out now. by going under render and hitting render. Just before I do that, really quickly, my image size is set fairly large here. You can easily set this down to something like, let's see here, hit divide and 3. For this I'm gonna run around 5, almost 600 or 800 pixels. My anti-aliasing samples are set fairly high, as I need to do it due to the depth of field on the camera. Otherwise it's gonna be very, very grainy. Otherwise my settings are fairly standard when it comes to my render settings. Next up, render. And I'm gonna skip this part as nobody wants to see me rendering. Alright, rendering is done. And now I go to save image, saved layered image, and just save it under my documents. Let's see here. Let's call it old man render. Go to Photoshop. Open up here, and now you can see as we save it as a layered image, we get up, we get all the various passes here, which is really nice. Or render outputs, as they're called in MODO. The first thing I do is I composite my ambient occlusion. Simply select it and hit set it to multiply. You can see the difference here, before and after. It's not a huge difference, but it's enough to emphasize some of the details. Next up, we have the specularity pass. Sometimes you want to increase your specularity. And it can look nice. Just set it to screen under blending mode. Next, reflection shading. This is a little overkill on this page, but let's just try it and see. It's slightly too strong, but it still adds some definition to our shapes, which I rather like. So I'm going to turn it down to about 40%. Next up, I add some brightness contrast to my image. Pretty much everything you do in 3D will need some brightness contrast or color grading to some of some sort. So just add some brightness and some contrast. Next up, this is a trick which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Adjustment layer, black and white, and put this to soft light. This will increase the contrast and make it more desaturated. So you can kind of give this cool effect. I think I want to take the brightness contrast down a little bit. Brightness down to about 5 maybe. I think it's a little bit too strong. Let's take black and white, adjustment layer down to about 50%. And now we can do some color grading on it by using color balance. Color balance is awesome because you can very quickly change the color scheme of your piece. I start with midtones, then I work my way down to my shadows. Under shadows, let's add make the shadows slightly more blue or yellow. Slightly more blue. You also have to be careful so you don't completely destroy your image. It's a good idea to often turn it on and off. Next, once you're done with this, you're pretty much done with your image color grading wise. But you there are a lot of tricks which you can do to just emphasize the image. Or just enhance it really. Make a new layer. Paint white where you want focus. Paint black where you don't want focus. Which looks amazing. Set it to soft light. And set it down to about 10-20%. Slightly too strong. What this is going to do is just going to give you slight focus where you want the focus to be. This is going to help to enhance the focus. You can also make a slight blue colored area like this. Set it to something like screen. And take the opacity down. This I feel sometimes gives more life to the character. You can add one here as well with a different color. And it makes it more atmospheric, I feel, as well. So to compare it to this, it just looks better already. So alright, this is almost it for this tutorial. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some chromatic aberration and sharpen to this, just to make it more photoreal. So the way I do this is I can hold down, this is a mouthful by the way, Ctrl Shift Alt E. This is going to make a new layer or copy everything into a new layer. So you now have an image on top, a layer on top, which you can then manipulate. So go under Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. And this is it's so subtle you can hardly see in the video, but this is going to sharpen everything slightly. Then I go to Filter, Noise, add noise, and add like a 1 to 2 pixel amount of noise. This again makes it slightly more photoreal. I'm going to undo this and set it to 1. Next, we go under Lens Correction. And put the red sign fringe quite high. This can give us like a slight fringe towards the edges here and make it more photoreal. You can also just play around with these, whatever we prefer. But it's under Lens Correction and Custom. And you can see here we get this nice chromatic aberration to it. Be careful so you don't overdo it, but a little bit can like add some photorealism to it. And that's about it. This took about 21 minutes in total, including render time. And this is the original image. The difference here is that I had more time to polish this, but the principles are the same. I spent slightly more time with the shading, slightly more time with the lighting, but it looks fairly close. So just to sum it up, the way lighting can be done really efficiently is by using area lights, which makes the lighting really soft and nice. Give you your area light, or use a 3-point light setup like I used here, which is fairly similar to this, which is key light, which is the majority of your light, rim light, which is the nice rim you can see here, and a fill light, which is just going to fill in this nice little purple area here. Next, adding depth of field by going under camera effects in MODO. Can look really nice, just make your image softer. Next, add complementary colors to your lights. Make the key light warm and your rim light cold, or vice versa. It just makes it look nice. And make one of them dominant. Don't put insane amount of saturation of both of them. And that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.